Okay, recording in progress. So hello, thank you all so much for coming today. Yeah, I'm James Brinkmann. I'm a doctoral student at Michigan State University. I'm in my final year. I'm also getting a master's in musicology. And so today's workshop is all about being intentional with our flute sessions and understanding what practicing and playing is. I've taught for over 10 years now. I've worked with students who are in elementary school up through adult students, people who are beginners, and even up through people who are professionals. Right now, I work with a lot of college students and adult students. And a lot of my pedagogy focuses on practice habits and becoming self-aware as musicians. And so this workshop is related to a lot of my interests as a teacher. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to starting that. Raquel, do you mind screen sharing the PowerPoint for today? Great, thank you. So let's see, and if you can go to the next slide, please. So today's workshop is going to be about being intentional with our flute. Our intentions today, I'm going to start with a brief story about where this workshop came from. And then we're going to dive into all the details about practicing versus playing. There's going to be some reflective activities throughout that I highly encourage you to participate in if you want to get the most out of this session. I will invite you to share your thoughts and reflections throughout, mostly in the chat, but please don't feel pressured to do so. Only share what you feel comfortable with. Just a little bit of a trigger warning. We're going to be discussing mindsets today, mostly in a general context. We're not going to be getting deep into it. I'm not a psychologist, but I just want you to know that we will be talking a little bit about mental health and things that can come up when practicing. So feel free to back out of the session if you want to skip at those points. For the reflective activities, if you want to grab a piece of paper and pencil or pen, you're welcome to do so right now, or you're also welcome to do those reflections with whatever device you are joining on. As Raquel said, if you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat. They can be questions about what we're specifically talking about or just broader questions about these concepts. If they're broader questions, put them in while they're in your mind, and then we'll address them at the end of the session. And if you have questions about the activity itself, please put those in and we'll make sure to answer those along the way. All right, if we can go to the next slide, we will get started then. Okay, so this idea of intentional fluting came to me a few years ago. I was asked in an interview, how often do you practice? And I smiled and kind of laughed because I just thought, oh my gosh, I get asked that so much. After 20 years of playing the flute, I feel like I get asked, do you practice every day? How many hours have you practiced? What does it mean to, like, isn't practicing work, but it's also your passion? What does that mean? You're so talented. It must be so easy and fun all the time, right? So I'm just curious, you can put it in the chat or just like your little raising hand button. How many of you have been asked, how often do you practice in your life? Any hands going up? I see one, a couple hands. More and more hands going up. Yes. So this seems to be something we're asked a lot. When I was younger, I actually was kind of annoyed by this because I was like, let me just do my own flute thing. And then I was also sometimes worried about being judged by whatever I was about to say. Like, would it be enough hours? What if I said that I was passionate about it? Does that mean I'm not working hard enough? Or if I was working a lot, does that mean that I'm not passionate about it anymore? It was a very gray and complex sort of running of answers in my brain. But over the years, these questions actually have made me really curious about what does practicing really mean in my life and in our world as musicians? Is it a job? Can I play without critiquing myself? Is it odd to be passionate about practicing? What if I don't feel passionate about practicing one day? How much fun do I have with the flute? And when I do have fun, what does it mean to have fun while practicing? So over the years, I've had a number of mini existential flute crises, especially during and after college. And even since the pandemic began, I have asked myself these questions over and over, trying to figure out, what am I doing with this metal tube? So at this point in my life, I actually start to appreciate the person who's asking me, how often do you practice? Because it's been making me reflect and share, what do I actually do with the time that I spend with my flute? So currently, I'm a teacher, performer, a researcher, and a graduate student. And so I approach these questions with a variety of experiences and perspectives. And I also like to help my students understand these concepts and determine how it relates to their goals, while also considering my intentions whenever I pick up the flute. So that just to give you a little bit of context into what my perspective and lens is with this workshop. We want to go to the next slide, please. So with much self-reflection, observing myself and my students and conversation with other musicians, I've really simplified my understanding of flute sessions by myself into two things: practicing and playing. So practicing, this I have seen is work focused on developing technical skills, analyzing scores, listening to pieces, and pretty much any type of work with the goal of improving. And that could be improving skills or your expression. And so anytime I'm trying to get better at something, I am practicing. And this is a picture of 12-year-old me who definitely really wanted to learn things. And so I always like to reflect back on someone trying to improve. And next slide, please. Now, the other type of flute sessions, playing, this intentional time is spent making music for the pure reason to make and explore music. It can include expressing oneself through specific pieces, playing your favorite pieces, sight reading music just out of curiosity. It could also be goofing around with a pipe in the middle of Home Depot, or playing along with favorite recordings and making up your own harmonies. So when we're just interested and we give ourselves permission, these creative activities are also part of playing the flute. Next slide, please. So these two definitions, they may seem super obvious. You may think, okay, I already know this. One thing I've noticed in conversations is that we don't often reflect on what these two things mean in our lives at this moment, because our relationship and understanding of practicing and playing can change over the years. And so I want to just take a moment and start to do some reflection. So what does practicing and playing mean for each of us? And so for our first reflection, I want you to just take a few minutes and reflect and write about, what does practicing mean to you in one column, and what does playing mean to you in another column. And please keep in mind, there are no right or wrong answers, and you are not required to share anything with us. For those of you who are just joining us, we're taking a moment to reflect on, what does practicing mean to us and what does playing mean to us? Thinking about the different characteristics of that. So as you're finishing those up, if any of you want to share, you can do so in the chat. What does practicing mean to you? What's one quality or characteristic of practicing, and what might be one characteristic of playing? I see Barbara has shared. Playing means performing before an audience and performing at your best from the results of practicing. Practicing involves experimenting, changing tempo, working out hard passages, working out interpretations, dynamics, coordinating with others, etc. Thank you for sharing, Barbara. I'm intrigued and like how playing and practicing seem to have a relationship. Right, and if we can go to the next slide, please. And feel free to keep sharing what practicing and playing mean to you. Here are some of the characteristics that define my ideal practicing and playing sessions. And I want to emphasize ideal. I don't always have all of these characteristics and mindsets going into my sessions, but these are things that I find important in defining that. And so as you're looking, so practicing for me, there's an internal motivation that is important. Other things, critical listening, compassion for mistakes that I'm going to make, and then a creative problem-solving mindset. Playing, just remembering that I love to play the flute, giving myself lots of permission to explore and play as much or as little as I want to in that moment, as well as other things. So thinking about, Stephanie shared, practicing is refining, playing is no judgment, free play. Thank you for sharing. So how do these versions compare to your own? What is similar? What is different? And so it's really important to understand what our mindsets around these two flute sessions are, so we can use this time meaningfully to be our best musical selves. I'd like you to take one more moment now and look at your characteristics and just take a note of which characteristics were passed on to you by a teacher or colleague, and which are things that you came to believe on your own. There's no right or wrong to this, but I just want you to, I think it's helpful to understand how we're influenced by others and how we come to define things on our own. Because that also helps us see that we impact other people with our understandings of these things, and we can also encourage others to think critically for themselves. Okay, so now that we've talked about our individual understandings of practicing and playing, I want to explore some ideas around the benefits and pitfalls with both of those sessions. And depending on your goals with the flute, you might have a different relationship to practicing and playing than your neighbor. You might resonate with some benefits of some different pitfalls of others. To give you kind of my perspective, practicing is a crucial part of my job as a performer and teacher, which makes playing often appear so frivolous. I remember from my undergrad thinking, oh, I don't have time to play. And that was also something that I noticed among other musicians. There's no time to just have fun with it. You'll have fun in the performance. You'll have fun at some other later point in your life. Right now, you have to go practice. But honestly, over the years, I really don't think we can afford not to play. We need to make time for playing sessions. And something I've noticed, especially over the past couple of years, there's an increasing awareness in mental and emotional health going on in our culture. And as musicians, I think this directly relates to how we view practicing and playing. So just something to note there. I've observed this problem for many musicians, including myself. Sometimes we get a bit lost by floating in between practicing and playing unintentionally and finishing sessions without feeling fulfilled. For instance, I might be practicing, but actually I'm just running through sections without working to improve or really noticing. Or I might be playing, but in reality, I'm judging myself constantly for any mistakes I've made, or, oh, I didn't like that sound, or other things. And this distracts me from the actual enjoyment of making music. So I do want to be clear, I'm not advocating for bad habits, but if we can separate practicing and playing, we can actually get more benefits out of both and kind of avoid some of the pitfalls. And that can bring some awareness to our flute sessions and making all of them a little bit more fulfilling. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the practice. Benefits of practice are pretty clear. The more you practice effectively and with appropriate material, the more advanced your skills become. But there is the saying, there can be too much of a good thing. So if we're only practicing, as I've mentioned, we can lose sight of this bigger picture, and our motivations for playing music can be solely achievement-based. In addition, our mental state, we can be really affected by only practicing. Frustrations are a normal part of practicing because we're wanting things to be meaningful and we're investing ourselves. But if practicing becomes regularly unbearable or regularly frustrating, this is a warning sign. So just note that for yourself. Only having practice sessions can lead to mental breakdowns if we miss notes or didn't have quite the right sound or the right intonation. If we're just not in tune, we're always hyper focused on things. We're trying to be perfect, which can lead to burnout and can often increase musician performance anxiety. However, if we design our practice sessions to be intentional and with compassionate and thoughtful practicing, it can actually improve our technical and analytical skills while also giving us confidence. And that compassion part is shown in research to actually help decrease performance anxiety and decrease perfectionism and burnout, in addition to some other important practices. So yeah, with thoughtful practice, you'll be able to explore much more music that the world has to offer, especially when in your playing sessions or performance. And while the work can be challenging, there's also a lot of joy and motivation to be experienced in intentional practice. Next slide, please. Playing, on the other hand, can keep our relationship with music and the flute very healthy. It eases the pressure and seriousness of what we do, which can make our time creating more music enjoyable. Sometimes you'll see this photo on the left is actually from a performance I do. It's called Concerto for Frenemies. And I put the wig and the makeup and the costume on. And while it's fun in performance, sometimes I actually just love to put the wig on at home and play my flute with it, because why not? It just makes the day a little more lighthearted and fun. I actually attended a recital earlier today of a fellow flute student in our studio, and he was wanting everyone to come in, just the audience to come in with really fun clothing and any hats or something. And I thought, I don't have a fun hat at home, but I do have a wig. And so I wore my wig to this recital, and it was a great time. And so that kind of creative freedom is and just joy of how am I relating to all of this is really important. However, there is a pitfall. If we only play with no improvement, it can seem like utopia to just play all the time, but without these challenges, our playing can start to sound bland to us because we sound the same every day, or some of our skills actually are starting to weaken. Because they're atrophying because of the muscles and muscle memory. So we can start to lose the joy of actually playing when we're not growing. And part of being a human is having this innate curiosity that's such a gift and this desire to try new things. So without time to focus on improving those skills through practice, frustration can actually rise when we're wanting to just play new things and harder music, but we can't actually enjoy them. So when balanced with practicing our playing sessions, can actually use these advancing skills to explore our creativity and how we express ourselves and musical ideas. And that can then deepen our relationship with the flute. And I just have to point out this little Lunchables picture. I have loved this photo for a number of years. And I actually have hung it up in some of my studios over the past years and just reminded, like, this looks great, but we really don't need Lunchable liquids flying out of our flute. So, and it can add a little lighthearted spirit. Next slide, please. So finding the balance between these two, I've already talked a little about it, but I like to relate it to hiking on a mountain or going on a long walk. And sometimes it can feel daunting or tiresome, especially depending on like the steepness of the mountain or the length of the trail. But don't let it discourage you, because practicing is like climbing the mountain and playing is like stopping to enjoy the view. And I like to think both are necessary for kind of a well-rounded, fulfilling journey. Practicing will help you express more in your playing, and playing will help inspire you to keep practicing. And music really doesn't get old if we're curious about this relationship between both, and if we're curious about our potential and aware of, what do I need right now? Do I need more practicing? Do I need more playing? And that can help us, again, be more intentional. Next slide, please. So we're actually now going to do the main portion of this workshop, this reflective activity on where are we currently at and how do we balance these things. Just a little, before we do the activity, no one's going to have the exact same balance. Our personal balances will shift based on our jobs, our goals, where we're just at in life right now. And so this is a practice that I encourage you to do at different points in your life. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But right now we're going to go through the 4 steps to bring more awareness to your flute sessions and see kind of where you're at and where you want to go moving forward. So the first step is understanding your current balance. So I want you to take a moment to write. We're actually going to take 5 minutes to do this, like 3 to 5 minutes. And I want you to ask yourself, what is my current relationship with the flute and music? Am I feeling creative, expressive? Am I challenging myself? And just, you can do a freehand journaling of that or write whatever notes you have. An additional question you can think about for this one is, how many days on average a week do you practice? How many days on average are you playing? How many days are uncertain if you're practicing or playing? And then another question for this part is, are there any particular struggles that you're having with practicing? Are there any particular struggles with playing that you're having? Okay, so now for the second step, we're going to look at our intentions and or goals, depending on how you want to think about it. I want you to just take a few minutes and reflect on what are your intentions with the flute right now? How do you want to relate to your flute? What are your intentions with flute playing in relation to if you're a teacher or if you're performing? As you're reflecting on your intentions, I want you to also consider, where are these intentions coming from? Do you feel like there's an external pressure for some of these intentions, or are you receiving guidance for some of these intentions? Not always a bad thing, but I just want you to note which of these intentions are fully internal, coming from you and your interests, and how much are having external influence as well. Okay. I like to give a full 5 minutes at least for that setting of intentions. I think we don't often slow down to really reflect on what our intentions are. We just think, oh, well, what's the first thing that comes to mind? I got to write it quickly. And so to just take that 5 minutes and really let it sit can help you to make any necessary changes moving forward, or changes that are important to you. So now, step 3, we're going to compare our balancing of practicing and playing, which was step 1, with your intentions. And so just take a moment and reflect on those. If you're working toward an audition or a performance, are you putting in the practice sessions to help you feel prepared? If you're trying to rekindle this love of flute playing, are you setting aside time to just play? And if you discover your balance and intentions don't line up, that's okay. If you are willing or interested in sharing in the chat, just on if you noticed that the intentions did not line up, are you needing more practice or are you needing more playing? So if you just want to write in the chat, I need more playing, I need more practicing, or I need both, or I need clearer separation between the two, feel free to put that in the chat. It can sometimes be nice to see that other people are having to do other things. Thank you, Joe. I need more playing. I need more playing from Shreya. Nicole, clearer separation. They tend to meld together. I received a private note from someone who also said they needed more playing. All right, so, oh, we have another one. Maybe we need an intentional playing group. Ooh, seems like there's enough of us who need that. I like that. I always like to think that, I was having a conversation with someone in the College of Music here the other day who was saying, gosh, I would love to just have chamber reading nights. I feel like everyone here is just working so hard on practicing, and I don't see a lot of people, and I wish we could just play. And I thought, yeah, that sounds great. And he said, maybe even just once a month. Doesn't always have to be, that group thing can happen, doesn't have to be a big deal. So I like it. So I just want to say that's great that we're gaining this awareness of what our current balance is. And if you found out, wow, my balance actually, my intentions line up with where I currently feel, Cool. That's nice when that happens. And if they didn't, well, now you have a moment to actually set some new intentions. And one thing I would recommend, or something you can do, is taking a week, and for each session or portion of a session, just make the intention, the aspiration of, do I want this to be a practice session? Do I want this to be a playing session? And then after those sessions, reflect, and did they help you toward your goals and intentions? And you just continue to make those small changes 1 week at a time. You don't have to overhaul your whole concept of playing in the span of a week. These habitual changes take time. And as life changes and our goals and intentions change, this balance is going to shift over well. Our careers change. My career took a big change about 8 years ago when I was very much an orchestral performer. And then I switched to being mainly a teacher. And then that kind of switched again by adding a different type of performance that wasn't orchestral. And those have shifted how I relate to my practicing and playing each time. And so it only makes sense that we reflect on this balance between the two every time something in our life changes, or every time we finish a performance or an audition, or, man, we just had our intentional fluting group, and how did that feel? Was that something that I want to do again? So the last step in this reflective activity is developing a mindset and a plan to be more intentional. There are 4 questions, or 4 little tabs on the PowerPoint, to help you in this part of the reflection. So basically, I want you to set some intentions for, what are you going to do moving forward now that you have some of this insight? How are you going to meet your needs to practice more or to play more? Are there things you can do at the beginning of each session or beginning of each week that might be helpful for you? As you're reflecting on those, if you want to share any of the strategies or kind of intentions that you're setting for yourself in the chat, feel free to do so. I know Deb Evans wrote, hard to maintain the intention of practicing when practicing. Yes, it is. One thing for me is I like to do small little chunks every day. That's something that helps me maintain my intention for practicing. When I try and tackle a whole piece or a whole section, that can be a lot. But if I focus on little things, I can feel like I'm making steps. I'm curious to see if other people will offer other ideas for how they're going to be more intentional. Exactly. One bite at a time. Yep. I probably say that in almost every student's lesson every week, just as a reminder. Even if they're doing it, it can be helpful just as a reminder. And I have to remind myself of that regularly. If we can go to the next slide, please. I want to make sure we get through everything. So kind of speaking as a teacher, and feel free to keep sharing your aspirations and intentions and ways you're going to improve. You can feel free to share those in the chat as we move forward. So as a teacher, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've taught a wide range of students. And I found these conversations about intentional fluting to be really beneficial with students of all ages. I will say the youngest I've worked with is 8 years old. And we had that conversation. Students of all skill levels, from beginner through professional, where as a professional, you're never done thinking about these things. At least I, for myself, I'm always trying to learn and grow. And so I'm never done thinking about these things. And whether your goals, they change, these conversations are beneficial for that too. If you are a teacher and having this conversation, I recommend starting from a place of curiosity and not judgment. Start with the difference of these two types of sessions and how much playing and practicing the student did that week. You might ask them what they think these two words mean to them and invite them into that conversation. And when asking how much they did that week, you can ask for a general percentage or a fraction or a number of days, kind of whatever you feel is appropriate for the student, or kind of see if you can get them to give their own way of measuring it. Even if that's most of the time I practice and a little of the time that I play, that's already giving them some ways of thinking about it. Remembering that this conversation is not meant as a gotcha moment or a shaming conversation. That's really important as the teacher. And so setting your intention before that lesson of how am I going into this conversation and what questions do I want to ask and how am I asking those questions is really, really important for helping the student just navigate this concept. So it's quite the opposite. This, when done well, this actually can be a really eye-opening conversation and very informative for the teacher and sometimes the student about what are the long-term intentions or short-term intentions for playing the flute, and how can you as the teacher be the most beneficial for them? Because lessons are about the student. And so we're trying to figure out how can I show up better for them. At the bottom of this PowerPoint, I've just included a few questions that you can ask or topics that you can inquire about. And so you can look at those. And then just to wrap up kind of the talking and reflective portion of this, and then we'll go into the questions, any questions you have. I always like to reflect on the origin of this workshop, in which I was asked, how often do you practice? And so I'll give you a little bit of my answer. And it's so fun because I've done this workshop a few times, and every time my answer is different. And I really love that. So with my current life goals and just life scenario, I spend about 5 to 6 days a week playing my flute, or I should say in flute sessions. Each day my sessions vary in terms of how much is playing versus practicing. Some days are just playing, some are just practicing. Most days have both right now. So I'm practicing about 5 to 6 days a week, and I'm playing about 4 to 5 days a week. About 3/4 of my time in the week is practicing, and about 1/4 is playing. But as I say at all of the workshops, most importantly, I'm trying to have strong intentions whenever I'm with my flute. And I will say, when I am able to reflect on these things and I take the time, I try and find times around after big performances or after the end of the semester or seasons, things like that. That's my time to reflect. And I do find that having these separate intentions really has brought a lot of joy and fulfillment for me in both practicing and playing. And it also has helped a lot of my students find more intention and fulfillment with their flute. And I hope it does for you as well. So thank you to the NFA for having me today. Thank you all for coming. I wish you happy fluting. And at this point, I'd like to open up. We've got 10 minutes. So I just want to open it up to any questions or thoughts that you have. Yeah, and we can close down the PowerPoint. Thank you. And thank you to Raquel for helping me run this. Really appreciate it. So yeah, any questions, feel free to, I don't know, we can put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and unmute yourself, that would be fine with me too. Yeah, Pam. You're still muted.
I try so hard. Thank you for your presentation. I don't have a specific question. I just wanted to say that I really hadn't thought of the difference, and I, along with some other folks, am looking forward to intentionally playing for fun, because I'm almost always thinking about what little exercises and what big exercises I can do to improve. So thank you for this idea.
Oh, you're welcome. And thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's so funny. Like, I also went through so many years not thinking about the difference between the two. And when I look back on those sessions, I'm like, wow, oh, that's all I was doing. And like, so yeah, I'm glad you're joining on the journey of being more intentional. And I hope you get some more playing time as well. Shreya, I see your hand is up.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was great. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about like when you practice with the intention of achieving a goal and then like you feel like you're not making progress, or like you feel like you're not hitting that goal right away. Like, is there like something you can do with the balance to help that?
Oh, that is such a great question. Yeah, so I think this is where I'm thinking back to the mountain metaphor. I don't, if you came in for that part, where practicing is climbing the mountain and playing is stopping and looking at the view, and enjoying the view. When I'm practicing and if it's not working, or if I know I'm like stuck in the process, but I have to keep going through this process because it's just important, I set really clear times for my practicing. So I'll say, I'm going to do 20 minutes. I'm going to do the exercises that I know I just need to do. Like, I need to go to the gym. I just need to show up and do it. And then I'm going to have X amount of time where I'm going to go play. And I'm going to put everything I'm working on to the side and make sure that I go play. And that actually, sometimes in those scenarios, if the practicing is really tough, playing with a friend, you know, doing something social, if possible, can be really healthy and just get me out of the kind of getting stuck in practice. But yeah, if I need to get something done and I'm like, oh, I can't fully stop, setting smaller, really focused practice sessions that are trying to get at the work I'm trying to do, and then having additional playing time. Does that kind of get at your question?
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, good luck with that. You're not the only one. I think that's a universal experience. Actually, I do want to say sometimes, now as I'm reflecting a little more on that, sometimes I will just take a couple days off of practicing. It depends on how close the, like whatever goal you're working on, if it's a performance, if there's like an actual deadline, I have to be mindful with how much time I can take off. But sometimes, you know, you need a day or two off. And I think this is where having breaks in flute playing is really important. So, Joe, it's a pleasure. I'm seeing your comment. Thanks for having the conversation. Always a pleasure. Thank you for coming. And Deb, I'm glad you won't feel guilty to play. Yeah, that permission to just, it's okay to have a good time is so important. I actually have to say, when I started playing more, it opened my eyes to a whole new type of performance that is actually what I focus on now, which is interactive performances. And I won't get into that, but it opened my life into a whole different way of expressing myself as a musician. So you never know where it'll lead. Any other questions or thoughts? Oh, here's one. Any tips for, Camille asks, do you have any tips for dealing with performance anxiety? Having listened to your session, I think it will help to truly allow performing to be a time to share my music rather than critique or judge it. But do you have any other tips? Thank you. Yeah. So I should preface this with saying I'm not a mental health expert. So depending on the severity of your performance anxiety, anyone may want to see a mental health expert about that, because they will have specific strategies depending on what your physical like behavioral symptoms are, like if you have any physical sensations, also with any mindsets that you have around performing or playing the flute. Mental health professional, absolutely. In terms of practicing versus playing and how it relates to that, I think to me, that is generally, in the past when I've taught students and for myself, that's a sign that I need more playing in my life. Maybe not less practicing, but just more time for enjoyment as a reminder of why I like to do this. And that just kind of grounds me a little bit. Sometimes I will take something I'm working on for a performance and put it into the playing session, and I'll throw my wig on or just do something fun with it. Sometimes I'll go and play it in public, like not as a performance, but I'll go to the park and play it there. Or I like drawing and writing a lot. So I will record myself, and then maybe I'll draw while listening to recording myself and just say, oh, what are these things I'm imagining while listening to my recording? Kind of have a creative experience with that to remind me that a listener might enjoy this too. And so kind of just it can shift how we think of what's going on in the performance. One thing, so that's kind of the playing side. In terms of the practicing side of it, I would consider, what is my mindset when I go into practicing? A critical ear is helpful in practice. I think that's part of that, for me, is part of a good practice session, is having a critical ear, because I want to listen and I want to know, how am I improving? What am I improving on? But I think making sure that I also bring compassion with that critical ear and recognizing that I'm trying to grow. That's a normal thing. Making mistakes is a normal thing on a daily basis. I don't think I've ever had a complete day where I just played phenomenally the whole day and I thought, oh, I reached it every single moment. I think we make mistakes all the time. And I think kind of normalizing that with yourself, that it's okay, it's normal to make mistakes regularly. Also normalizing it with other people, that people make mistakes regularly in performances. We may not always hear them or perceive them, but we all do. And so I think having that kind of self-compassion is really important. There's actually, I'm going to put Dr. Kristen Neff. She is a psychologist, I think. She's a researcher, and she has a wonderful website on self-compassion and empathy. And I think a lot of her tips on how to become more self-compassionate relate to ways of handling performance anxiety. So without being a medical expert, those are some of my tips and thoughts on that. Thank you for asking that question, by the way. That's like a very, I feel like that question is actually on a lot of people's minds, and I really appreciate that you brought it up and brought it to this conversation.
She's here.
Any other questions or thoughts? All right. Well, I'm going to put my email in the chat just in case if you have questions or want to continue this conversation beyond here, start an intentional fluting group or flute playing group. You know, please feel free to email me. I love to talk about this and would be happy to hear about your experiences moving forward, or let me know in a month or two if you're like, hey, I tried this and this is what happened. I would love to hear about it. Otherwise, thank you again for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
Thank you very much.